Hi again, everyone. Welcome back to Timeless Testimonies. So today we're going to be beginning with a testimony found in Volume 5. Begins on page 654. This testimony is called The Nature and Influence of the Testimonies. And this is very, very long. We're not going to go through it all in one video. I'll be doing several videos going through this particular testimony. But the reason I'm going to this one next, it actually is very, very good at encapsulating more information on the testimonies, how they should be understood, how they should be viewed, how we should respond to them, that sort of thing. Just the nature and influence of the testimonies is very rightly titled. So we're going to go through the first few pages, just one little section here. And before we discuss it, I'm going to read through it and we'll get the whole context of it, and then we'll go back and touch on some highlights. So in the testimony, she begins like this. As the end draws near and the work of giving the last warning to the world extends, it becomes more important for those who accept present truth to have a clear understanding of the nature and influence of the testimonies, which God in his providence has linked with the work of the third angel's message from its very rise. In the following pages are given extracts from what I have written during the last 40 years relating to my own early experience in this special work, and also presenting what God has shown me concerning the nature and importance of the testimonies, the manner in which they are given, and how they should be regarded. And then she quotes from an earlier testimony. It was not long after the passing of the time, in 1844, that my first vision was given me. I was visiting a dear sister in Christ, whose heart was knit with mine. 5 of us, all women, were kneeling quietly at the family altar. While we were praying, the power of God came upon me as I had never felt it before. I seemed to be surrounded with light and to be rising higher and higher from the earth. That was taken from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, page 58. At this time, I had a view of the experience of the Advent believers, the coming of Christ, and the reward to be given to the faithful. She continues to quote, in a second vision, which soon followed the first, I was shown the trials through which I must pass, and that it was my duty to go and relate to others what God had revealed to me. It was shown me that my labors would meet with great opposition, and that my heart would be rent with anguish, but that the grace of God would be sufficient to sustain me through all. The teaching of this vision troubled me exceedingly, for it pointed out my duty to go out among the people and present the truth. One great fear that oppressed me was that if I obeyed the call of duty, and went out declaring myself to be one favored of the Most High with visions and revelations for the people, I might yield to sinful exaltation and be lifted above the station that was right for me to occupy, bring upon myself the displeasure of God, and lose my own soul. I had before me several cases such as I have here described, and my heart shrank from the trying ordeal. I now entreated that if I must go and relate what the Lord had shown me, I should be preserved from undue exaltation. Said the angel, your prayers are heard and shall be answered. If this evil that you dread threatens you, the hand of God will be stretched out to save you. By affliction he will draw you to himself and preserve your humility. Deliver the message faithfully. Endure unto the end, and you shall eat the fruit of the tree of life and drink of the water of life. That was taken from Volume 1, pages 62, 64, and 65. At this time, there was fanaticism among some of those who had been believers in the first message. Serious errors in doctrine and practice were cherished, and some were ready to condemn all who would not accept their views. God revealed these errors to me in vision and sent me to his erring children to declare them. But in performing this duty, I met with bitter opposition and reproach. Quoting again, she writes, "It was a great cross for me to relate to the erring what had been shown me concerning them. It caused me great distress to see others troubled or grieved. And when obliged to declare the messages, I would often soften them down and make them appear as favorable for the individual as I could, and then would go by myself and weep in agony of spirit. I looked upon those who had only their own souls to care for and thought, if I were in their condition, I would not murmur. It was hard to relate the plain, cutting testimonies given me of God. I anxiously watched the result, and if the persons reproved rose up against the reproof, and afterward opposed the truth, these queries would arise in my mind. Did I deliver the message just as I should? Could there not have been some way to save them? And then such distress pressed upon my soul that I often felt that death would be a welcome messenger, and the grave a sweet resting place. I did not realize the danger and sin of such a course until in vision I was taken into the presence of Jesus. He looked upon me with a frown and turned his face from me. It is not possible to describe the terror and agony I then felt. I fell upon my face before him, but had no power to utter a word. Oh, how I longed to be covered and hid from that dreadful frown. Then could I realize, in some degree, what the feelings of the lost will be when they cry, "Mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." Presently an angel bade me rise, and the sight that met my eyes can hardly be described. Before me was a company whose hair and garments were torn, and whose countenances were the very picture of despair and horror. They came close to me and rubbed their garments upon mine. As I looked at my garments, I saw that they were stained with blood. Again I fell like one dead at the feet of my accompanying angel. I could not plead one excuse, and longed to be away from that holy place. The angel raised me to my feet and said, "This is not your case now, but this scene has passed before you to let you know what your situation must be if you neglect to declare to others what the Lord has revealed to you." With this solemn warning before me, I went out to speak to the people the words of reproof and instruction given me of God. That is that section of the testimony, and as I read it, I am so moved by the seriousness of it and the import. So let's go back now and more closely look at a few of these key points. One of the things that really stood out to me is at the very beginning, she writes, "As the end draws near," now are we closer to the end now than when we first believed, so to speak, than at the beginning of the Advent movement? "As the end draws near and the work of giving the last warning to the world extends," so it's advancing, it's extending, "it becomes more important for those who accept present truth to have a clear understanding of the nature and influence of the testimonies, which God in his providence has linked with the work of the third angel's message from its very rise. Okay, so there's a couple things here. Obviously, the point that we are nearer to the closing up of the work, and that the work is extending in the world. But notice that she writes, it becomes more important for those who accept present truth. Now, what is present truth? Because she says that present truth is what the flock needs now. Well, was something that was written 200 years ago present truth? Some people would say that it is. But I'd like to suggest another video on YouTube. And my husband is the one that actually made this video. It's called The Idea of Present Truth. And I'll have a link up here where you can go to that and easily see it. So it's very important for those who believe in present truth to have a clear understanding of the nature and influence of the testimonies. That's why we're going through the testimonies for the church, because it is very important. It's part of the third angel's message. Very, very interesting. The next point that stood out to me that I'll share with you guys is on page 655, paragraph 2 of volume 5 of the testimonies. She's quoting from a previous testimony written in Volume 1 of the Testimonies, I believe, is what it was. The reference is there earlier in the video. She writes, one great fear that oppressed me, so her fear is that if I obeyed the call of duty, now notice, it's not that if she disobeyed, but it's that if she obeyed. If I obeyed the call of duty and went out declaring myself to be one favored of the Most High with visions and revelations for the people, I might yield to sinful exaltation, etc., etc. But notice what the obedience is. In order for her to obey, it meant that she was to declare herself to be one favorite of the Most High with visions and revelations for the people. Well, that's different. I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I've since investigated for myself to know if I'm believing these things just because I was raised that way, or if I actually know why it's true. And that is why I still believe in the inspiration of Ellen White and the progression of truth. And so as I look at this, this is very different from how things had been portrayed to me and how I understood things to be with Ellen White in her ministry. I always thought of her really downplaying her role as a messenger, and that was supposed to be a sign of her humility. Now, I do think Ellen White was a very humble person. And I don't think that this negates humility, but look at what she says here. One great fear that oppressed me was that if I obeyed the call of duty and went out declaring myself to be one favorite of the Most High with visions and revelations for the people. So in order for her to declare the message, she had to be bold with it. She had to actually let people know that she had a message. I think that's very important. We shouldn't view someone who is called of God to bear a message as in a negative way if they just go out and declare that they have a message to bear. Now, there wasn't anything wrong with Ellen White doing that, and there shouldn't be anything wrong with any messenger of God to do that. All through the Bible, you see people declaring, all the prophets, they said, I have a message. And somehow we've kind of lost sight of that, or at least some of us have. I know I had for a long time. So I thought, there might be a chance that some of those watching have gone through the same experience. So I just wanted to share that and make that observation. Now, another observation I made is on page 656, paragraph 1. And she's quoting again from a previous testimony. Here's what she writes. It was a great cross for me to relate to the erring what had been shown me concerning them. So this wasn't something that she enjoyed doing. It was a trial. It was a cross. It caused me great distress to see others troubled or grieved. And when obliged to declare the messages, I would soften them down. Now she's admitting a fault here. She's admitting something that she had done wrong. So in softening down the messages, that wasn't the right thing to do. She says, when I was obliged to declare the messages, I would often soften them down and make them appear as favorable for the individual as I could. But then, look what she says. And then would go by myself and weep in agony of spirit. She had a tough situation. She had a high calling, and her job was very, very serious. I think we should definitely keep that in mind when we consider what she wrote in the Testimonies for the Church, and consider how cutting and severe some may appear to be in these testimonies. But as we read on, we'll be reminded what we read just a few minutes ago too. She then says, I looked upon those who had only their own souls to care for and thought if I were in their condition, I would not murmur. So she's kind of thinking, oh, well, if I didn't have so much to be concerned about, I wouldn't complain. So that's, she's admitting some more faults here. It was hard to relate the plain, cutting testimonies given me of God. So it was a hard thing for her. It was tough. Then she continues to write, I anxiously watched the result. And if the persons reproved rose up against the reproof and afterward opposed the truth, these queries would arise in my mind. Did I deliver the message just as I should? Could there not have been some way to save them? And then such distress pressed upon my soul that I often felt that death would be a welcome messenger. It reminds me of Elijah after defeating the prophets of Baal with the whole sacrifice thing and the fire coming down and consuming his sacrifice, but not theirs. How then he fled from, I believe it was Jezebel. Hope I'm not getting my stories mixed up. He fled for his life, and then he thought, just kill me now. He didn't want to live. And it's like, no, he thought he was the only one and that his burden was very heavy. It was hard on him. But what God told him was he had thousands of people who had not bowed the knee to Baal. So this is a similar type of situation. It comes across that way to me. She says that death would be a welcome messenger and the grave a sweet resting place. Now, I also can't help but think of an example of God pleading with Lucifer, because the point I'm focusing on here isn't that death would be a welcome messenger. It's the part just before that where she says she would ask herself these questions. Did I deliver the message just as I should? She's wondering, was there some fault in how she presented the message that God had given her that caused these people to reject it and to oppose the truth? And she also asked, could there have been some way to save them? Well, there's the example of God pleading with Lucifer for a very long time. And Lucifer still resisted, rejected the reproof, and went in full out opposition to the truth. So the point here is that while it's important, very, very important, to care as much as Ellen White did about saying things and doing things in just the right way, that sometimes it's not enough for people. Everyone has free choice. And it's not always an indication of someone not doing their job as well as they should have or could have, but rather it's an indication of the state of mind of the person receiving the reproof. So continuing on in the very next paragraph, she writes, I did not realize the danger and sin of such a course until in vision I was taken into the presence of Jesus. He looked upon me with a frown and turned his face from me. It is not possible to describe the terror and agony I then felt. I fell upon my face before him, but had no power to utter a word. Oh, how I longed to be covered and hid from that dreadful frown. Then could I realize in some degree what the feelings of the lost will be when they cry, mountains and rocks fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So I just wanted to share that to kind of show and bring out again that she's admitting her faults. She's actually admitting that it was sin that she had given into with that state of mind, that mindset of despair and wanting to just die. Then in the next paragraph, she's explaining how the angel asked her to stand up and what she saw after that, and how there was a company of people whose hair and garments were torn, and their countenances were the very picture of despair and horror. Now, if we really allow the import of these words to sink in, I'm sure we can all visualize some pretty horrific scenes. And it sounds like that's not too far from what Ellen White saw in vision. Those people, they came really close to her. They rubbed their garments on hers. And when she looked at her garments, they were stained with blood. God was showing to her how important her mission was and how she could not water down the message. She could not water down the reproofs. So the angel then explained to her that that wasn't her case yet. That wasn't her case right then. But that she had been shown this scene to let her know what her situation would be if she neglected to declare to others what the Lord had revealed to her. So then, in volume 5 here, Ellen White adds to the record from the previous testimony, with this solemn warning before me, I went out to speak to the people the words of reproof and instruction given me of God. So after that vision, there was a change in her approach, in how she went about presenting the testimonies to people and to groups. So basically, this is setting the stage for how the testimonies came to be given. And, remember earlier on in page 654, Ellen White wrote that in the following pages, so the rest of this testimony, what we're going to be going through in the next few videos, in the following pages are given extracts from what she had written. That's what she was telling us during the last 40 years. So she's going to be sharing a lot of information, just a small amount, of course, of what was written over those past 40 years, but some key highlights. And what they're relating to they're relating to her own early experience in her work. It's also presenting what God had shown her concerning the nature and importance of the testimonies, the manner in which they are given, and how they should be regarded. So this is going to be our focus as we continue on with our next studies, going through the nature and influence of the testimonies in Volume 5. So we're wanting to understand what the nature is, what the importance is of these testimonies for the church. We want to understand the manner in which they were given. Were they just her ideas? Were they to be taken as authoritative? That sort of thing. Where did she get these ideas? Did she make them up? Were they given to her by God? And we want to understand how we should take them, how they should be regarded by us. And, we can take it a step further. If we were to receive rebuke or counsel or correction from God today, then the same principle should apply, that we should regard counsel and reproof today the same way as counsel and reproof by inspiration should have been regarded in Ellen White's day. So that's our focus. And I look forward to going through the rest of this testimony with you in the near future. Um, I pray that we're all blessed by investigating these topics and that our walk with God will become stronger and stronger and we'll be better able, better equipped to help others as well. Blessings and shalom.